Howdy, y'all. It's Juliet Necro, and I want to live in the kingdom of Zeal and listen to Corridors of Time for the rest of my natural life. Also, I have a pop filter now, so it's over for all of you. I have a confession to make. I have historically been a Chrono Trigger poser. While I did have a Super Nintendo growing up, my first introductions to JRPGs were Super Mario RPG and Paper Mario. These were both excellent games and remain among my favorites, but I was scared to seek out many of the other RPGs on the Super Nintendo, fearing their complexity. Even as a little girl, I was intimidated by complex games. To this day, I own games that I'm scared to try because of how mechanically dense they are. My fears, of course, were largely unfounded. JRPGs aren't that complicated. At least the good ones aren't. This aversion did fade away with time, though. I played Earthbound after receiving a Super Nintendo copy as a birthday present one year. I was a strange girl who asked for Super Nintendo games as birthday presents, well into the era of the Wii and DS, which probably explains why I turned out to be a strange old witch who writes about video games for fun. Anyway, Earthbound is essentially a Dragon Quest game, which makes it a surprisingly good stepping stone into JRPGs proper, if you don't mind its somewhat archaic interface. The first Final Fantasy game I ever played was Final Fantasy I on iOS, which I bought and played more out of curiosity than anything else, and it definitely hooked me. A few years later, I had Game Boy Advance copies of Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy V, and a Super Nintendo game labeled Final Fantasy III, which I pedantically knew was really Final Fantasy VI. In middle and high school, I only had Nintendo consoles and a PC that wasn't powerful enough for most modern releases. My parents were also possibly the only parents in America who actually followed the ESRB age ratings when buying games for my brother and I when we were kids. As far as I remember, the only games that I played that were rated T before I was actually a teenager were Super Smash Bros. Melee and Shadow the Hedgehog. I don't regret this or begrudge my parents for it at all, for reasons that I'll get into some other time. All of this had the effect that a lot of my game purchases in those days were focused on filling out my libraries of Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, and Nintendo handheld games. I was a Nintendo baby to the core, and playing the early, Nintendo-bound Final Fantasies was part of that. Yet, for some reason, I never sought out a copy of Chrono Trigger. There was a store near my house growing up called Movie Trading Company. Despite its name, it also sold used music and video games. I would later find out that it was part of a chain of different used media stores that go by different names in different US states. My local movie trading company had a copy of Chrono Trigger. I saw it almost every time I visited that store as a self-hating teenage girl. I never bought it because they were asking for an obnoxious markup for it. I believe they were selling it for something like $200, and this was before a bunch of obnoxious speculators started deliberately inflating the price of vintage video games. I later realized after I started shopping online for myself and patronizing locally owned used media stores instead of corporate ones, that Movie Trading Company had been ripping me off as a teenager. You could always find everything they were selling for at least 20% cheaper at a local store or online. Therefore, it's Movie Trading Company's fault that I've historically been a Chrono Trigger poser, not my own. I did later obtain a DS copy of the game but never got around to it, but let's ignore that. I am, as I always have been, utterly blameless. However, I was a Chrono Trigger poser nonetheless. It was a gaping hole in my experiences of Super Nintendo RPGs that I hadn't experienced. I believed people when they said it was good, and internalized it as, quote, one of the best RPGs on the platform, end quote, in an abstract way. I come to you now, in August of 2022, to say that Chrono Trigger is now finally a video game that I have played, and yes, the people who called it one of the best games on the platform were right. It just might be my favorite JRPG on the Super Nintendo, even though I played the Steam release on my laptop. In celebration of my extremely late arrival to the Chrono Trigger party, it's time to discuss why I love this game, and what its story tells us about how important hope is, especially during youth. I strongly believe that Chrono Trigger represented, and still represents, a leap forward in RPG storytelling. JRPGs were still coming into their own in the Super Nintendo and Genesis generation. The games for those consoles, but especially the Super Nintendo, did a lot to define how we imagine a JRPG. Imagine a JRPG. Rotate a JRPG in your mind. Part of that process was breaking out of the narrative rut that a lot of the RPGs of the NES era were in. An awful lot of the RPGs on the NES and Master System had a very simple setup. You are the hero. There is a villain terrorizing the land. Go get him. Earlier RPGs of the SNES Genesis generation started to break the mold, but none so radically as Chrono Trigger, and that was because of what I consider to be a very interesting story decision. At the beginning of the game, Chrono goes to attend the Millennial Fair to celebrate the year 1000, where he meets Marl. After spending some time together trying out the fair's activities, including the best combat tutorial ever put into a JRPG, they go to attend a demonstration of Chrono's friend Luca's new invention. Luca and her father have invented a form of teleportation between two paths. However, when Marl tries it out, the machine reacts with her pendant, causing a mysterious portal to open and Marl to disappear. The other attendees of the demonstration start to leave. They presume that the design must have simply been a failure, and they don't lift a finger to help the girl. However, that's when Chrono steps in. He volunteers to follow Marl through the portal to find her wherever she ends up, regardless of the potential dangers. The whole story of Chrono Trigger begins because our character chose to do the right thing at a critical moment. When Chrono Trigger was released, RPGs were still working out how to escape the narrative rut of some of their tropes. Especially in the NES era, most protagonists were scions of a great destiny, bound by fate to defeat evil. Often they're already on the job as heroes before the player even hits the start button on the title screen, such as in Final Fantasy I, which begins with the 4 Warriors of Light showing up at Cornelia Castle, fully aware of being the 4 Warriors of Light and already possessing the 4 crystals. Final Fantasy III at least showed our characters discovering their destiny. Dragon Quest I and II's protagonists were heroes on account of birthright, being descended from the hero Erdrick. But Chrono is a hero because he stepped up to do the right thing. Even though Chrono doesn't speak, we still get a sense of who he is through his actions in this scene. Chrono is defined by doing the right thing when no one else is going to step up. He's not a hero because of his birth or because of circumstances forcing him to become heroic. He volunteered because it was the right thing to do, and I think that's a fantastic narrative choice. It gets repeated on a larger scale later in the story. Partway through the game, after some early time travel business, Chrono runs afoul of the Chancellor of Guardia and goes to jail. He escapes with help from Luca and Marl, but eventually they find themselves cornered by the Chancellor's troops. In a split-second decision, they jump through a time gate without knowing where and when they'll end up when they do. They find themselves in 2300 AD, 1,300 years ahead of their own time. The whole world is devastated. Robots and mutants run rampant in the ruins of cities, and the few surviving humans huddle in the cramped ruins of the domes their ancestors lived in. They have machines that take care of most of their physical needs, but they do nothing for hunger. In the future, everything is despair. Chrono, Luca, and Marl do manage to find some seeds in the abandoned basement of one of the domes, which restores some modicum of hope to the people of the future. When you return to the top level of the dome, Doan, the leader of the remaining humans, comments how different Chrono, Luca, and Marl are from the future humans because of their hope in their hearts. This hope spreads, as on future trips to 2300 AD, the future humans have had enough hope restored to try once more to cultivate food. However, our 3 heroes also learn the awful truth beneath the dome. The 3 characters access a computer terminal to try and find information on a time gate that could take them home, but also discover how the world of 2300 came to be the way that it is. In 1999, a horrific monster called Lavos burst forth from beneath the earth and rained destruction upon humanity, leaving it in the sad state it finds itself in 300 years later. Luca and especially Marl are devastated by witnessing how their world ends in the future. However, let's remember something here. Lavos is not really Chrono, Luca, and Marl's problem. They're all teenagers who live in 1000 AD. They'll be long dead by the time of the Day of Lavos in 1999. At this point in the story, they could very easily return to their own time, go home, and relegate Lavos to being someone else's problem. However, once again, they choose to do what's right instead of what's easy. Marl is the first to recognize that because they're familiar with time travel, they're better equipped than almost anyone else to find a way to stop the Day of Lavos from happening, and thus their journey truly begins. Again, I believe this is a great narrative development. It's also the first time we hear the game's main theme, and this will happen several more times. The track titled Chrono Trigger could almost be considered the theme of hope within the game's narrative. It repeats later on, and I think it's a very cool stylistic choice. Everything that happens after this point in the story is because of our character's voluntary commitment to stopping the Day of Lavos from happening. There's something interesting about Lavos to me as an antagonist. It's hard to call Lavos a villain, considering that's more or less an animal doing what's in its nature, but I'm fascinated by what Lavos represents. Initially, Chrono, Luca, and Marl decide that they need to stop Magus the Fiend Lord in 600 AD, believing that that was when Lavos was awoken. After defeating Magus, who actually woke up Lavos in an attempt to destroy it, another portal opens up and the party finds themselves in prehistory. After witnessing Lavos' arrival on Earth in that time period, they're then sent to Antiquity in 12,000 BC, a time period they hadn't previously visited. Here, the world is starkly divided. Those that can use magic live on floating continents in the magic kingdom of Zeal. They call themselves the Enlightened Ones and have a strong prejudice against non-magic users. The non-magic users are called Earthbound Ones, and have a meager existence on the snowbound surface. The source of this division is Lavos. Lavos impacted the world in 65 million BC, and magic in the world of Chrono Trigger is derived from tapping into Lavos' power. This is why Ayla, your only party member from prehistory, can't use magic. Also, Square put a muscly bisexual woman in a video game in 1995? If Chrono Trigger was released today, Twitter would probably have a Lady Dimitrescu moment over her. The point is, the distinction between magic users and non-magic users in Antiquity derives from Lavos. It's especially tragic because it's implied that humanity had been on track to turn out differently if Lavos hadn't impacted the Earth. The two human villages in prehistory mend their differences before Lavos arrives, and the reptites are destroyed in the impact. Lavos introduces the world to magic, and thus new fault lines emerge among humans. The conflict echoes down through the generations as well. In the Middle Ages, there is a conflict between humans who can't use magic and monsters who can. It's unclear how monsters fit into this paradigm, but it's still the case that magic plays into this conflict, which even extends into the present. The remaining monsters are led by the descendant of Magus' lieutenant Ozzy, and the Chancellor of Guardia has been replaced by Yakra the 13th, just like the first Yakra impersonated the Chancellor back in the Middle Ages. I believe it's very possible that humanity might have collectively found some way to stop Lavos, if Lavos' influence hadn't caused division among them. Instead, by 1000 AD, humans have forgotten that Lavos even exists, let alone by the time of the Day of Lavos in 1999. There are a lot of side quests that open up to you once your time machine, the Epoch, is equipped with wings. Some of them involve healing the divisions that exist between people and between humans and monsters. The division between the Earthbound Ones and the Enlightened Ones in Antiquity is healed at least partially because Zeal itself crashes into the sea. However, what really allows the two groups to get over their differences is first being united against the self-styled King Dalton, and then seeing the time travelers defeat him. Even after you defeat Magus, there continues to be division in the Middle Ages between humans and monsters that extends to the present, like I said. When you visit the monster village of Medina in 1000 AD, the monsters are rude to you, and the shop owner even discriminates against your human party. However, one of the side quests involves returning to 600 AD to dispatch Magus' 3 lieutenants, Ozzy, Slash, and Flea. With these 3 having been defeated, Ozzy's descendant is no longer the ruler of Medina in 1000 AD. When you visit Medina after completing this quest, the monsters are just as friendly as the people of any of the other towns in the game. They greet you warmly, and now the Medina shop even has some of the best prices in the game instead of some of the worst. I think this is a great touch. I appreciate that the game implies that the division between humans and monsters isn't inherent. Instead, it's influenced by who leads each of the two groups. The monsters of 1000 AD still hate the humans because that's how they were taught by Ozzy's descendants, so removing that influence makes them reasonable. I like what this game says about people's nature before they're influenced by their circumstances. Chrono Trigger implies that people's nature is to cooperate. We saw them get over their differences in prehistory until Lavos reintroduces division. Now mind you, I'm not reading this as a centrist thing. In our world, we're kept divided by arbitrary things like nationhood to keep us from actually solving our problems, and Lavos distracts humanity with conflict by introducing magic to the world. Who's to say this isn't an intentional part of Lavos' biology? Maybe it gives magic to the species of its host's world, for the specific purpose of sowing discord among them, and preventing them from actually solving the problem of Lavos destroying the world. What makes this theory particularly compelling to me is the attitude of the Kingdom of Zeal in Antiquity. This is the only time period before the Day of Lavos where most humans are aware of its existence. The Enlightened Ones of Zeal, and especially Queen Zeal herself, don't care. In fact, they intentionally power their magnificent creations using Lavos' energy. They've decided not to recognize Lavos for the threat that it is because it benefits them. It's extremely telling that the machine that the denizens of Zeal use to derive energy from Lavos is called the Mammon machine in the game's English translation. In the New Testament, Mammon is identified with greed, and medieval Christians believed that Mammon was one of the 7 princes of hell who represented that sin. The Queen of Zeal is so desperate for the benefits of using Lavos' power that she ignores all the risks, which leads to disaster. Only her daughter Shala and the 3 gurus realize how dangerous this is. Eventually, Shala refuses to operate the Mammon machine any longer, to the ire of her mother. The younger generation curbs the excess of the older. In Shala's case, it's too little too late, but this is a consistent theme in Chrono Trigger. When I initially played Chrono Trigger, I read the story of Shala, Queen Zeal, and the Mammon machine as a metaphor for climate change. Someone in the Goblin Bunker Discord pointed out to me that it was also applicable as a warning about nuclear power, which is a reading that is more likely closer to the developer's intent, considering the time and place of Chrono Trigger's making. However, I think the fact that it works either way is a testament to the writing's strength. I don't believe it was a coincidence that your first 3 party members, the ones who first decide that their quest will be to stop Lavos, are 3 teenagers. Chrono Trigger is a story all about how the new generation has the power to break the cycle that the old one is stuck in. Our 3 teenage protagonists, Marl, Luca, and Chrono, are instrumental in ending each time period's conflicts and in getting the other party members on board. The first of these is Robo. Of course, first of all, Luca is the one who repairs Robo when the party finds him abandoned in 2300 AD. Robo owes Luca his life in a literal sense. Quickly afterwards, in the next dungeon, Robo encounters some more of his own kind. They label him as defective and mercilessly beat him. The most harrowing part of this scene to me is how quickly Robo internalizes the idea that he's defective just because the other robots in his series claim it. After Chrono and the other party member defeat the robots, they bring Robo back to Protodome. Luca repairs him again and asks him what he wants to do now that he's already lost his original purpose. Robo is thrilled that for the first time in his life, he's been given a choice of what to do, and he chooses to go with the 3 kids from 1000 AD on their adventure to stop Lavos. These 3 kids gave Robo hope when he felt rudderless. Later on, with their help, he even realizes that what those robots told him was a lie, and that it was a result of the corrupt AI that created them. In the end, he's vindicated. His purpose was never to eradicate humans, so he's left free to live his life as he chooses. Robo becomes selfless and heroic in his own right thanks to the influence of those 3 kids who came across him. In a later side quest, he volunteers to spend 400 years replanting an entire forest in order to reverse desertification. Robo breaks down in the process once again, and Luca finds him and repairs him once more. The friendship that develops between Luca and Robo is one of my favorite little story threads in this game. It's very sweet, and their short scene together in the game's ending sequence makes me tear up every time. However, it's time to move on to our next character. Next up is Frog. Frog is a knight of the Kingdom of Guardia in the Middle Ages, who helps Chrono and Luca on their initial quest to return Marl to her own time. The last we see of him during this segment is him going into exile over his failure to protect Queen Lean. Later on, Chrono, Marl, and Luca return to 600 AD, believing that Magus created Lavos and therefore defeating him will save the world. They find Frog again at the bottom of a hole in the forest. Everyone on the southern continent is claiming that a young boy is the hero, and that boy, Tata, is in the mountains looking for the legendary sword Masamune. Frog is despondent that someone else seems to be the legendary hero and the wielder of the Masamune. However, upon going to the mountains themselves, it's very clear to Chrono, Luca, and Marl that Tata is no hero. They later confirm that Tata stole the hero's badge from Frog while Frog was drinking at a bar. Later cutscenes confirmed that Frog possessed the hero's badge prior to Tata stealing it. However, at this point Frog's self-hatred is so deep that even though he knows his hero's badge has been stolen, he goes along with the narrative that Tata is the hero, repeating his belief that he's no hero even after Chrono gets the hero's badge back from Tata. It's only after a trek to prehistory and then the present to reforge the Masamune that Frog finally gets up and tries again. I'd love to show you some footage of that quest to reforge the Masamune, but this Steamport's stupid anime cutscenes keep glitching out OBS, so I don't have it. Stupid cutscenes. I love Frog's story in this game. Frog knows for a fact that he's supposed to be the hero. He possesses the hero's badge, and he can wield the Masamune. In spite of this, he hides away because of his lack of self-confidence. It takes his friends returning and having the confidence in him that he lacks in himself for him to step up and be the hero he was meant to be. I love the whole plot line of Frog and the Middle Ages in general. The broad strokes of the Middle Ages plot are like a classic JRPG plot of the previous console generation. It's a high fantasy world where there's a conflict between humans and monsters. The monsters are led by an evil sorcerer, and there's a hero of destiny seeking the legendary sword to put down the usurper. Magus' title of Fiend Lord calls to mind the Dragon Lord, the villain of the original Dragon Quest. There's even a lot of elements of Magus' design that echo various Dragon Quest villains. I mean, that could also just be because it's a Toriyama design, but you get what I mean. In a more conventional RPG, Frog would be our silent protagonist, but Chrono Trigger makes the interesting choice to give him a voice and delve more into his personality. It's only after his friends from the future, the 3 kids from 1000 AD, make a grand gesture of believing in him that he accepts the Masamune and leads Chrono and company to Magus' castle. Magus is the one who turned Frog into a frog in the first place. Frog was originally a human named Glenn, who grew up in the shadow of the knight Cyrus, and the support of Chrono and company finally allows him to step out of Cyrus's shadow and become who he is supposed to be. Frog is the protagonist of an NES RPG, but unlike those people, he actually has an inner life and is the recipient of the hope that Chrono, Luca, and Marl bring with them wherever they go. Frog is the best. Also, he's a trans allegory, but y'all ain't ready for that story. Speaking of Magus, let's discuss his story. If Frog is the hero of an NES RPG who got the development that his predecessors lack, then Magus is the same for NES RPG villains. When you first arrive in 600 AD, you hear rumors and news of Magus' war on the humans, but initially don't meet him. It's not unlike how many villains of NES RPGs, like the Dragon Lord or Hargon from Dragon Quest, or Xande from Final Fantasy III, or Lassic from Phantasy Star, get mentioned repeatedly throughout the game, but never actually appear until it's time for the player to come and kick their ass. At first, it seems Magus is this way. The first glimpse of Magus that the player gets is in Frog's flashback of being turned into a frog, and you don't see hide nor hair of him again until it's time to storm his castle and kick his ass. Like I said, up to this point, the player has been led to believe that Magus is the one who created Lavos in 600 AD. After a confrontation and a really climactic boss fight, Magus reveals that he was trying to wake Lavos in order to try and kill it. Magus is actually originally from antiquity, and after the player first visits that time period, they meet his past self, the child Janus. Janus' older sister is Shala, the princess of Zeal, repeatedly forced by Queen Zeal to power the Mammon machine. The young Janus is very shy, but incredibly devoted to his big sister. In the original timeline, Shala summoned Lavos at the Ocean Palace, and Janus was flung through time to the Middle Ages, where he was found by Ozzy and grew up into Magus. Thus, once more we see a character who's tropey on the surface, but has been recontextualized. Everything Magus did in the Middle Ages was a revenge quest against Lavos for separating Magus from his beloved sister. When he summons Lavos in 600 AD, everyone gets flung through time again. The party winds up in prehistory, but Magus actually winds up returning to his home time period. Here, he's so desperate for another shot at Lavos that he actually takes a disguise as a prophet and helps his mother complete the Ocean Palace. When Chrono and his friends get captured, Magus almost kills them, but his past self and Shala intercede on their behalf, so instead he banishes them from antiquity. Once they return and confront the Queen at the Ocean Palace, Magus finally throws off his prophet disguise and attempts to challenge Lavos. It goes about as well as you'd expect, and he's equally unable to prevent Chrono from being killed by Lavos. Shala saves Magus and the other 2 characters in the player's party. From then on, her fate is unknown. Now that he's attempted to fight Lavos on his own and failed, Magus offers to join the party. In my view, the story of Magus is a bit subtler, but I like it all the same. None of the characters has a more personal vendetta against Lavos than Magus, and that's reflected in his role in the story. His drive for revenge is so single-minded that he doesn't even realize that Chrono and his friends also want to stop Lavos. He's so persistent and blinded by vengeance that he only joins once it's been proven to him that his plan wouldn't have worked anyway. The writing in this game is wonderful for making even a lot of characters who would be one-note villains in any other game really interesting characters in their own right. Even minor villains like Azala, the leader of the Reptites in prehistory, have some depth to them. I wish there was as much to say about Ayla as there is to say about the other party members in terms of her arc, but I actually think that she's interesting the way she is. As I've said, she's your only party member from prehistory prior to the arrival of Lavos. Therefore, I see Ayla as a statement of Chrono Trigger's view of the state of nature. Yes, Ayla may not use connecting verbs and speaks in the third person, but she's quick to make friends and very hospitable. While the two human villages of prehistory have had differences in the past, once the reptites destroy the other village, Ayla is quick to aid the people trapped in Tyranno Lair and mend her differences with them. Ayla is the game's statement that people are basically selfless and driven to community at their core, and that they're divided more by artificial things than by nature. It goes back to what I said about the influence of Lavos on the development of antiquity's stratification, or the Middle Ages and the present's conflict between humans and monsters. We can see that basic goodness and selflessness are still alive and well in the present day in our three teenage heroes, Chrono, Luca, and Marl. Without their willingness to step in against Lavos, none of the rest of it would have happened. Robo would have stayed abandoned and disused. Frog would still be hiding in a hole in the woods, afraid of his destiny. Magus would have died fighting Lavos in 600 AD. None of the divisions in the different time periods would have been healed. The future would refuse to change. But because they do what's right, it all works out in the end. Chrono Trigger is a game about how one person choosing to do what's right instead of what's easy has a ripple effect that can change the world. Obviously, you and I don't have access to time travel. Personally, if I could time travel, I would probably attend a lot of concerts and slap my pre-transition self, but that's beside the point. While we don't have time travel, we can still make connections with people, and those connections are what will see us through. It's often hard to find hope these days, but there's hope in each other. The world we live in today is a lot like Chrono Trigger's antiquity. It appears beautiful on the surface, but adjust your perspective and it's all wrong. Society is stratified, and the people at the very top are destroying the world to benefit themselves at the expense of the rest of us. We're all living in the kingdom of Zeal. But the lesson of Chrono Trigger is that community is what will bring us through. We'll make it through the coming decade and beyond if we pull together. Alone we're weak, we doubt ourselves, we stumble and we can't find our way back up. But together we can cover each other's weaknesses, assuage each other's doubts, and help each other up when we fall. Together we can change the world. It reminds me of another story I love, that's also about a mindless hunger consuming the world and being stopped by a community banding together. In Adventure Zone Balance, before the final battle, everyone in the world hears this message. You're going to have to fight, and you're going to win. There is hope in numbers and in communities, even against world-ending parasites from beyond the starry veil. Lavos has often been compared to cosmic horror monsters like those written by the infamous racist loser H.P. Lovecraft. The difference, of course, is who is up against that monster. Lovecraft's protagonists are all like him, so they fear what's alien and hide from it. Chrono Trigger's characters find strength in each other, strength to overcome the impossible, even across oceans of time. That's all for today. If this video resonated with you, please consider leaving a like or subscribing to the channel. Till next time, ciao. Thus, once more we see a character who's... Why do I write sentences like this? Why do I write sentences like this for myself?